The President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. Without further ado, we would like to continue hearing the testimony of Mr. Cham Sai, and the floor is now over to the counsel for the civil parties, and you have 20 minutes left. Counsel Jet Wanli. Thank you, Mr. President. I may now continue putting a few more questions for Mr. Cham Sai. Due to time limit, I would like to put a few questions and then hand over to my colleague to finish part of her questions for Mr. Cham Sai. I would like Mr. Witness to tell the chamber regarding Okan Sang Security Center. You testified that Okan Sang was a re-education center for the division, but according to your testimony, question number 12, document E3/405, you said you received civilians as prisoners at Okan Sang as well. Can you describe to the chamber, please, who were or who these civilians were? Were they new people, workers, or others? The President, Mr. Witness, please hold on. Counsel for Mr. Nuon Chia, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not sure how this question relates to communication or structure, so that's why I object to this particular question.
Counsel, please allow me to respond to this. The question was put for him because we noted that the re-education center was the center for the division, and before the co-investigating judges, Mr. Cham Sai said that civilians were also received at the center. I would just like to ask for some clarification whether new people also detained at the center, and I believe it falls within the scope of these trial proceedings. The President, the objection is not sustained. Witness is now instructed to respond to the question. Response. By late of the year, some people were sent from Sector 101 to this center. No other people were sent from other sectors. By late 1977, as I remember, these people were sent to the center, to the re-education center. Counsel, thank you. Can you also tell the chamber, please, were these people among the evacuees? Response. These people were the base people. Question. Please clarify on one more point, why these base people were sent to this re-education center? Response. According to the reports we obtained, these people used to be workers in the union, and they talked something that were implicated, and some people didn't like the way they ate, the way they talked. That's why they were sent for re-education. That's all. Counsel, thank you. For those who were sent and detained at Okan Sang Security Center, were they also offered some education sessions so that they could be corrected, and were they done under your supervision? Response. I gave them some lessons on how they can refashion themselves, and also I advised them on how to correct their behavior, their view and work perspectives, and I also lessened their fears and worries, and after being re-educated, they were returned to their places. Question. According to document E3/407 in Khmer 00401315, English 00406222, and French 00402279. You talked about the purge. You talked about the situation which was very chaotic. Can you describe this to the chamber again, please? Response. After the country was liberated, it was time that the line of the party was being implemented, and it was in two stages that such policy was implemented, and I could see that in the military the situation was rather chaotic and disorganized, because people could accuse others for committing some wrongdoing, and it was really disorganized. And I could also note that it was a transitional period, the period to transfer the society into a social one, and people had to build their view and stance, social stance, for example, and that also applied to military. And those soldiers who were free, who talked freely, who accused or criticized one another would be very common, and for that we could see that the situation was rather disorganized, and it was difficult to control them, and enemies increased, and also I can see that I was not holding a senior position, so I couldn't grasp very well what happened at the cooperatives. But what I remember is that we collected the information, and through education sessions we would impart or indoctrinate, educate people to make sure they could be corrected, should be following the social line or policy. Question: apart from this policy, did you also carry out measures to purge people in accordance with the party's policy? Response: first and foremost, we were obliged to implement the policy. However, in implementing such policy, it was not our first resort to kill people, because it was part of our first plan to educate people to rebuild oneself, and these were part of our measures being carried out. Thank you, says counsel. Mr. Witness, as the head of Okan Sang Security Center, were other cadres from the upper echelon sent to assist you or to work at the center? Response: there were some of them being sent to the center. However, they were not of senior rank. They were sent from a unit, a person by the name of No, who was assigned to work at the Okan Sang Re-Education Center, because he would like to understand the enemy communication line. He would to understand more about the inside or internal and external enemies. And for this reason, he was sent to the center to follow this information. Counsel: thank you. How did you know Mr. No was sent from the general staff? Did he present to you any letter certifying that he was actually sent from general staff? Response: yes, he did give me the letter, and I also called to the chief of the division to see whether he was actually sent from the division. So Savun confirmed such assignment. Question: when he returned, did he bring along with him the documents he acquired during the course of his work at the center? Response: yes, he did. He collected the documents he obtained during the work at Okan Sang Security Center. Thank you, Mr. Witness. Question: you said No came from the general staff to grasp the internal and external enemy situation. Can you tell the chamber a little bit more on how you characterize the internal and external enemies? How were they different? Response. My unit was located in the northeast area, which was rather remote from the central part of the country, and people really wanted to know the situation there. And first and foremost, they would like to establish, to have the knowledge of how the enemies operated and communicated. That's why they would like to know about this communication system, because every now and then confessions or words in the report could tell us about the enemies, about the communications, and for that they would like to know more about it. Thank you. Question. As the head of the re-education center, were you familiar with the disappearance of some commanders or leaders of the military? Response. Yes, I was, and I was familiar with this. But what I learned back then was that when people disappeared, they were believed to have been called to study sessions, and they never returned. Question. Do you still recollect any of the names of the individuals who disappeared? Response. I can't recall everyone, and I think my recollection regarding names are too poor to tell you about this question. Do you still remember just a name of a senior individual in the military, for example? Just a name, if you can. If you cannot, it's okay. Response. To be sure and to be on the safe side, I may not wish to name an individual, because if I say a person was a bad one because he had been sent to re-education or to study session, then I would be presuming or speculating, so I would not do that. Thank you. According to the same document, E3/405, under question number 8, ERN number in Khmer 004T 1301, English 00306013, and French 00422251. You say that at the beginning there were roughly 50 prisoners, but this number increased to about 100. How can you describe or why these prisoners increased? Response. I said at the beginning there were about 5 to 60 prisoners, and later on the number increased. It is not difficult to tell you about this because the situation developed from bad to worse, and the purchase operation was intensified, and for that more and more people were sent to re-education center, and this also coincides with the intensifying situation at the border areas. The President Council, the 20 minutes we allocated to councils for the civil parties have now been used.
Thank you, Mr. Witness, for enlightening the court on the various issues. I don't know whether or not the President would grant us some more time so that my colleagues can proceed with further questions. The President, unfortunately, your time is up now. Next, I hand over the floor to the defense team for Mr. Nguyen Chia to put the question to the witness. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. Witness. I don't have many questions for you, just some follow-up questions in respect of answers that you have been giving this morning and earlier in January. My first question would be, you were asked earlier in January by the prosecution why you joined the revolution in 1970. And you have replied that it was the call from Prince Norodom Sihanouk that convinced you to join the revolution. Now, do you remember whether there were any other reasons for you in 1970 to join the revolution?
The first reason, as I mentioned earlier, it was due to the appeal by the then Prince Sihanouk. And there was another personal reason of mine, because at that time my home village, my hometown was along the Cambodian-Vietnamese border. At that time, the Vietnamese forces from South Vietnam encroached on our territory, and then they attacked our village, and there were also air raids as well in our hometown back then.
Mr. Witness, the way that the Lon Nol regime acted after the coup d'etat in 1970, did these acts or that behavior of Lon Nol officials or soldiers also contribute to you joining the revolution?
No, at that time it did not have any influence on my decision yet. And as I told you earlier, the first reason was the appeal by the then Prince Norodom Sihanouk, and then later it was my personal reason because of my hometown was being attacked at that time, and then the war broke out in my village. So I felt compelled to join the revolution, and there was no choice for me at that time but to take refuge in the forest, and I had to join the resistance forces then.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. In an answer to a question about your military activities in the period 1970-1975, you have answered in January, and I quote from the transcript, page 37, that I was still the military chairperson leading the soldiers to engage in the fighting in the battlefields. Could you expand, Mr. Witness, what you meant with leading the soldiers to engage in the fighting in the battlefield? What did you do exactly from a military perspective?
I'm afraid I do not quite understand your question. Could you please elaborate your question further?
Of course, Mr. Witness. You have said earlier in January on a question from the prosecution that you were a military chairperson and that you were leading the soldiers to engage in the fighting in the battlefields. Could you expand today what you meant with that answer? What did you do when you were leading the soldiers to engage in the fighting in the battlefields?
I led the soldier to engage in the battlefields. At that time, it was against the Lon Nol administration in order to liberate the nation.
Were you actively engaged in combat in the period between 70 and 75?
Yes, I was. We were engaged in constant combats until the war was over in Phnom Penh.
And in those engagements, in that combat, did your unit suffer casualties?
Yes, there were many casualties gradually in all battlefields, and I myself was also injured and wounded several times as well in many battles all the way to Phnom Penh.
Were at any point in time ever soldiers of your unit captured by the Lon Nol military?
Soldiers subordinated to my unit were never captured by the soldiers of Lon Nol.
Do you know of capture of soldiers of other units of the Liberation Army by the Lon Nol military?
It's a bit difficult to answer this question. whether or not there were any captures of soldiers from other units, because I did not witness by myself. I only heard rumors from others, and our units were stationed quite far away from each other, and we did not know forces of other units. At that time, there were no proper communication functions, and we had to mobile or move from one position to another position separately and in small units.
Mr. Witness, in one of your answers in January on the question of the prosecution, you have testified, that is on page 49 of the transcript, that the, and I quote, liberated army, I presume that means the Liberation Army, was of a high morale. They did not conduct any vicious acts toward the people. That was the discipline of the army. Could you elaborate on what you meant with saying that the Liberation Army was of a high morale and that there was discipline within the army?
The President. Witness, please hold on, because there is objection from the prosecution. Mr. Prosecutor, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't have an objection to level. It's just a question with respect to methodology. If my learned friend is to quote a passage from the PV, perhaps he would be so kind as to provide the ERN numbers in all three languages, or at the very least provide the time at which the answer was provided, so that all those following can actually verify where he is in his document. Thank you.
The President. Counsel, you may provide necessary information as suggested by the co-prosecutor, either the ERN numbers or the times when the question was answered by this particular witness. Mr. Coupe, could you entertain the prosecutor with this?
Yes, of course, Mr. President. I did say, I think, that I was on page 49 of the transcript. And it is on top of that page, the first 5 sentences. At this point, I don't have the exact ERN numbers in Khmer or in French. As an alternative, I could formulate more loosely about what the witness has testified earlier. I'll rephrase. Mr. Witness, you have testified earlier that the Liberation Army was of a high morale and that there was a level of discipline within the army. Could you please expand on what you meant when you said that earlier?
Concerning the morality of the Liberation Army, during the Liberation era, at that time we had to abide by the 12 code of morality. We do not steal the properties of the people. We have to cling to the good life morality. And I myself also adhered to this code of morality. I never abused my role, and I never committed any vicious act against the people. And I had to comply with the rules of soldiers. At that time, we had to resist against the government forces.
I presume when you were giving this answer that you were talking about yourself and about your unit. Are you in a position also to speak about other units of other zones in respect to discipline and morale.
I cannot comment on the conduct of other units. Of course, we cling to only one line, but as for the actual practice on the ground, I cannot comment on the conduct of other units.
Have you ever seen reports, or have you ever heard reports about other parts of the Liberation Army who were not so disciplinary and of a high morale during the evacuation of the population in 1975 in April in Phnom Penh?
To my knowledge, there was no information concerning any immoral conduct or corruption or so. There was no torture or any other barbaric act or so on the part of the soldier against the civilian people when they came to Phnom Penh at the time.
Have you ever seen or heard reports indicating there was a difference in discipline and morale between the forces entering Phnom Penh from the south in April 75 as opposed to forces entering Phnom Penh from the north and the northwest?
As for this particular question, I do not have any answer to it, because I did not have a whole picture of the situation at that time, because I was a low-ranking official. I did not have a full grasp of the overall situation like people in the higher command.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. I would like to move on to another subject. In January, you have given testimony about a conference which took place at the Olympic Stadium in 1975. One of the things that you have testified to is that, according to you, that there were 21 senior leaders present during that conference. Now, my question to you is, the number 21 seems to be very specific. How do you know there were 21 senior leaders and not, for instance, 20 or 22 or 19? What is the basis of your knowledge in respect of that particular number?
Yes, I can respond to this question. At the time, I was invited to attend the meeting, the conference as well, from the regiment. We were the representative from a regiment. And I was also in command post as well, so I was invited to attend this conference to oversee what was going on and what were the matters or issues to be discussed at that time.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Witness. But my question was, you have been speaking earlier in January, testifying about 21 senior leaders present. And my question was whether you could explain to the trial chamber how you arrived at that number of 21 senior leaders.
In the programs, they established the organizing committee, and these organizing committee members were named. And then normally those organizing committee members were named, and members who participate in the conference would know those who were in the organizing committees of the conference.
So did you base your conclusion that there were 21 senior soldiers present on this program, or were there other reasons for you to conclude this?
There were documentation as well. There were mention of names of senior leaders at that time. And inside the party itself, it also announced the presiding members of the conference. But if you ask me as to who was in what position at that time, I could not recall, but there was a mention of the 21 leaders.
Are you saying that you actually saw the number of 21 in the documentation that you had at that time? Present?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. I move on to another subject, Mr. Witness. You were asked in January about the content of one of the revolutionary flags. And you answered in response that you were not in the capacity to be offered a revolutionary red flag to read. You have been saying that you were a member of the Youth League and that you were not privy to the content of the revolutionary flag. Now, would you be able to tell us what the procedure was, what the standards were for who at that time were receiving issues of the revolutionary flag and who weren't?
At that time, the period lasted for 3 years, 8 months, and 20 days. And during this period, the individual members have to mind their own business. But in terms of the training based on the revolutionary flag, there were ongoing training and circulation of the issue of this revolutionary flag. So these revolutionary flag were material used for training as well in order to redirect the direction of leadership of the party.
I understand your answer, Mr. Witness, but my question was whether you know who were in a position to receive issues of the revolutionary flag and who weren't. Who within the CPK were authorized to receive and read issues of the revolutionary flag? Do you know?
So your question is, who gave the revolutionary flag? In the party rank, the Youth League was the organization to implement the internal matters of the party, and party members, the full-fledged member of the party, can also implement the party line as well. And as for the documentation and the study material, normally it was circulated to party members. Normally at each section or each unit there was secretary, and it was the secretary who disseminate information received from the upper authority.
Mr. Witness, maybe it's a translation issue. Maybe I just don't understand correctly what you have been saying, but you have said earlier, you've testified earlier in January, that you were not in the capacity to be offered the revolutionary red flag. Do you know whether there was a division, for instance, in rank within the CPK as to who were receiving these issues and who were not?
As I said, only the party members, the full-fledged party members, receive the issue of revolutionary flags. Those who are only candidate members, they do not receive the revolutionary flag, but they receive the revolutionary youth magazine.
Do you know how the full members who did receive issues of the revolutionary flag communicate the contents of a particular issue to the non-full members of the CPK or the lower ranking members of the CPK?
Response. I cannot describe in detail the insight of the party's affairs, so I am afraid I cannot do this, and I'm sorry. The President, Council, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Witness. It is now appropriate moment for lunch adjournment. The Chamber will adjourn now, and next session will be resumed at 1:30. Court officer is now instructed to assist the witness and his jury counsel during the adjournment and have them return to the courtroom by 1:30 p.m. Security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Kilsompon to his holding cell and bring him back to the courtroom by 1:30 p.m.